Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, I've got an interesting story about accessibility from Evil Hat Games. What is the Lazy RPG Talk Show? What is this show that I'm doing? What is it about? We're going to talk about the show itself a little bit. And then I'm going to dive deep into the 2 new Forgotten Realms books that just came out this past week in local game shops and for pre-order and are coming out in a couple of weeks. And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. So last week in the world of Sly Flourish, I released a new article, Improv versus Prep. In this article, I talk about how you can look at what you have prepped and what you use in your games to refine your prep to ensure you're prepping the things that you need and not worrying about the stuff that you don't need to run in your game. Kind of an interesting little cyclic approach of prep stuff, then run your game, then look at the stuff you prepped and look at the stuff you use during the game to decide what you're going to prep next. So that was last week's article. Next week's article, which should be out by the time you hear this or read this, is 3 alternative initiative options. There are many initiative options, but I'm going to talk about 3 in particular that I think are particularly useful, including going around the table, elective action order, also known sometimes as popcorn initiative, and fast and slow turns, with a bonus one of Monsters Go on 12. So that is an interesting and fun article about initiative that'll be coming out next week. Both of those articles you can get by joining the Sly Flourish newsletter, totally free to sign up, linked down in the show notes. You will have articles like this emailed to you in the future. And for patrons of Sly Flourish, for hero tier patrons of Sly Flourish, I also have readings and reflections where I read these articles aloud to you. You can listen to them in your car or while you're mowing the lawn or whatever you're doing. And then I dive into some information behind the article. How did the article come about? What some other kind of thoughts and ideas I have about the article. So you get kind of the director's cut version of the article by being a hero tier subscriber to Patreon. The Dyson map gallery. So one of the wonderful Dyson of DysonLogos.com is a true hero of the fantasy role-playing game world and releases a ton of maps, both of a full collection of like 14, I think it's like 1,200 or 1,400 maps on their website, but also releases a bunch of these maps with an open commercial license. So one of the features that I have for patrons of Sly Flourish is known as the Dyson Commercial Map Gallery. This is a map gallery of more than 600 Dyson maps that are all in a single archive that you can download and store on your local machine or run it from the website where I host it. And it gives you a gallery with a little slider bar. That way you can use it however big your display is. You can set the display to what you want. And a huge gallery of different maps that Dyson has developed over the years. You then find the map that you think serves you best for the adventure that you're going to run. You open that map up and then you have a map available to you. I update this map gallery every 6 months. So that's about as frequently as Dyson updates the commercial map gallery, is roughly every 6 months. So every 6 months I go and I see if there are any new maps. I run a little script, pull down the new maps that exist and throw them into the archive. And then I put the archive up so that the archive is updated. I did it just this past week. So about every 6 months is how often. And if you look at your Patreon, if you are a patron of Sly Flourish, and you should be, it's a really good deal, you can see the last time I updated the maps, but it's every 6 months. And usually, I don't know exactly, I think it's about 12 new maps a year. So not a huge ton of new maps, but it's always nice to have the latest map gallery. And what I think is really important is you have the ability to click it and download this map archive. And now you've got that archive locally on your machine. You can put it in your 3-2-1 backup system and ensure that you will always have access to these maps for the end of time. I always worry. I think it's fantastic that Dyson, if you go to Dyson Logos and you go to maps, in this case, we'll go to all maps. 1,500 maps available on Dyson's map gallery. And that's fantastic. But I always worry they're one bad domain name away from losing access to all of this stuff, which always makes me nervous. I think these maps are great, and it's fantastic that Dyson is putting them out there. And I believe Dyson has it in their heart to keep these maps available for as long as possible. But things can happen. And when things happen, sometimes services like this disappear. So one of the reasons I created the Dyson commercial map gallery was not to simply copy the maps over and put a thing on them, but to put them into a single archive so that you can click in and download it, and you have all 600 maps available to you in one archive. So that is the Dyson. That is not all the 1,500 maps, because those are not all available under commercial license. Only the 600 maps are available under commercial license. And so those are the ones that I'm putting here in this map gallery, which is available to all paying patrons of Sly Flourish. So that is the Dyson Map Gallery, updated this past week. So I had my annual 2025, it's not annual 2025. I had my annual Ravenloft Shadowdark game yesterday. It was awesome. I had 6 players over, many of which I have not played with. A couple of them I had never played with before. A couple I have not played with in many years. And then a couple of people I've played with a little bit more recently. But I always try to bring in like a group of people that I have not played with before to run it. And it was an awesome time. Everybody had a really good time. Interestingly enough, they did not recover any of the 3 items that they were seeking. In fact, 2 of the items are in the same place, and they knew they were trying to make their way there, but they got caught along the way. They ended up still able to defeat Strahd. I used the normal vampire stat block from Shadowdark. So this is the Shadowdark Ravenloft game. I used the vampire stat block from that, and that worked really well. They were still able to defeat him. He did kill one of the characters outright, and a lot of others were down significantly as he was zipping around the room, tearing into people. So I did a couple of little tricky bits. One is the vampire in Shadowdark, as written, is able to heal 2d6 health on every hit that they do, which is 21 health. On the assumption that they hit and their attack bonus is pretty high, they could heal up to 21 points every round, which is about half the hit points that the vampire has. I thought that was too much healing. So I said that it only works once a turn, that they can only heal once a turn. That way there was a little bit greater chance, because you also have vampires who can only be hit by magical weapons, which means that they're going through the trouble of figuring out how to handle magical weapons and things like that. There's a lot of tricky bits. I think it would be too hard to defeat him if he was regenning as much as he was. I also changed his charm. Instead of him able to charm someone and keep the charm going for a long time, which I would give him the ability to do, but probably not during combat, I used a little 5e trick that I have, which is sort of the instant dominate. And the way the instant dominate works is that Strahd can look at somebody, force a charisma saving throw on, I think it's wisdom or charisma, I can't remember, force a wisdom or charisma saving throw on them. And if the target fails, they immediately go and attack an ally. But then they don't maintain that. So they're no longer charmed after they do that attack. They see instead the horror of what they have done after they make the attack. The nice bit about that is it's a fun way to kind of affect 2 other characters that might not have been affected by his bite and claw by having one of them attack the other. And it does not remove the player's ability to play that character on their own turn. So even though they're almost getting 2 turns, one turn where Strahd controls them and then one turn where they get to control them. That worked out pretty well. One of the players had a very smart idea. They knew that they needed silvered weapons. They realized they fought some specters and couldn't hit them because they didn't have silvered weapons. And they shattered a mirror and said, I know that the mirrors are probably made out of silver or have silver in them, and I'm going to make weapons out of silver from this. And I thought that was very smart, and they used those later. Unfortunately, the silvered weapons don't work against Strahd. Only magic weapons do. They did not have the opportunity to find any of the items, but they did find a very powerful, intelligent sword in the cells, in the lower cells. And that really made the difference. Them being able to use that weapon was a significant advantage for them. And that, I think, really pushed it over the edge and allowed them to win. Really fun game. I really enjoyed it. I don't know that I have any other like major tips or tricks that you can't find from like the article where I write about it. I used all of my house rules and that all worked really well. So yeah, we had a fantastic time and I really enjoyed it. Last week, actually, yeah, I guess it was last week. It was Friday. I had the opportunity to go onto the EN World podcast and talk all about the Forgotten Realms books. So I'm going to be doing a big deep dive of the Forgotten Realms books here on the show right now. But if you want to hear me talk more about the Forgotten Realms books and you want to hear the questions that PJ and Morrus had about it, and also us talking about other news, including like Project Sigil and other things, you can listen to me over on the EN World podcast. Thanks to Morrus for inviting me over. I kind of invited myself. I asked him, I was like, hey, I have the books. Do you want me to come on the show and talk about them? He's like, yes, I do. So I kind of invited myself, but he was very gracious and it was a really good time. And it was really fun to go over onto that podcast and talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games like we do here. I got an interesting note. I think this was over on the Discord server. Yeah, it was over on the Discord server. Eric over on Discord had a story that he wanted to share. And this goes along with the story I told a couple of weeks ago about somebody, an RPG player who I believe was blind, and reached out to Robert Schwab about making the PDFs, I think this is right, making the PDFs for Shadow the Weird Wizard more accessible. And Rob was able to make them more accessible for them, and it worked out really well. And so we got another story like that I wanted to share. So Eric on Discord said, I wanted to give a huge shout out to Fred, Sean, and Chris over at Evil Hat Productions. I bought their game Deathmatch Island a few months ago and ran into an issue with it. My issue related to the font keying and contrast between the fonts in the background in the printed and PDF versions of the game. This is something that I, as a neurodivergent person, along with dyslexic people I know, struggle with this. In this case, the layout made it hard to differentiate the letters. The brain does not process the words, which leads to repetition, which leads to frustration and abandonment of the material. I sent this off to Evil Hat back in July, and Fred took the feedback quite seriously. I was told that they were working on getting this into an EPUB and would let me know when it was done. 2 months later, Sean from Evil Hat messaged me with an EPUB file of Deathmatch Island, which allows for changes to the font to accommodate a wide range of issues for people. Just above and beyond service from a great team. My group is looking forward to our first game of Deathmatch Island. So this is something that, I brought up before, and I think it's really important. And if anything comes out of this, what I would really love is for more RPG publishers to take EPUB seriously as a file format. So why EPUB? What is EPUB? EPUB is an ebook format. It is an open standard for ebooks that allow you to bundle together whole books, like a bunch of chapters of books, tables of contents, and also media files like images and things like that, into a single package that you can then deliver to a customer, and they can open it up in an ebook reader. There are ebook readers available for pretty much every single platform. Because it's an open standard, there are lots of ebook readers available. On iOS devices, the Books app that Apple creates can open up ebooks. I know there are ebook readers on Chrome as well. And the main advantage is that you have much greater control over the appearance of the book, depending on the device you're on and depending on any needs that you have. The example here is you can change your font size, font styling, and all sorts of other issues to make sure that you can read it effectively. And this is one of these things where accessibility matters to everybody. I talked about this last time too. Accessibility matters to everybody. Everybody has some kind of accessibility thing. Maybe you like the font smaller. Maybe you like it bigger. Maybe you like Justified. Maybe you don't like Justified. You need more line spacing. You need a different font style. Everybody's got something that makes it easier to absorb material. But PDFs, you can't fix. You can't go into a PDF and change font sizes. It's really, really hard to do anything with PDFs. EPUB gives you that kind of flexibility. Unfortunately, building EPUBs is actually pretty hard. I'm lucky that, the various careers and things I've had in the past make it easier for me to create EPUBs of my books. So all of my books have EPUB, I think, except the workbook, but all of the material in the workbook that you would want in an EPUB, you can get in an EPUB of the Lazy GM reference document. So I have a lot of ways that you can get all of the material. I think every other book I have is available in EPUB as well. And I would really love to see more publishers publish an EPUB because it does give you open, accessible formats that mean you could read RPG material on a phone or on a tablet or on a desktop computer. You can scale it. I'm not saying do it instead of PDF. I think it's a good thing to include along with PDF, but I would really love to see more RPG books that were available in EPUB. So I thought this was a really good example of one of the reasons why. But it's not just simple people that are neurodivergent that need more spacing between letters or a different font style. I think all of us benefit from it just for having the ability of having a good readable version of an RPG product on our phone. Really advantageous. So I'd love to see more in EPUB. So I thought that was a good story that I wanted to share. Thanks to Evil Hat Productions for the work that you do, working with people to come up with accessible versions of your products that you can give to the people who can really benefit from it. What is the Lazy RPG Talk Show? Sometimes I think it is worth sitting back a little bit and talking about what this show is and what this show is not. I think this can be a useful conversation. And I've been doing this show for a long time, and sometimes I kind of forget what this show is and what it's about and who it's for. And so I want to kind of focus down and redefine that or define it so that we all understand what we're getting. I want you to understand what you're getting out of this show that I put on every week. So one thing that is very important to me is why I do all of the stuff that I do in this industry, which is I help GMs run great games. That is my goal. My goal is to help you run great games. And I'm targeting specifically game masters, not of any one particular system. and not even really of any one particular style, although I certainly have a style that I focus towards. But I want to help GMs run great games. There are other people that are really interested in working with players on the stuff that help with players. And then there's other more kind of industry-focused shows that focus on the industry overall. But my focus is on helping game masters. I want to help game masters. So that is kind of the focal point that I always ask myself when I'm looking at it. I am not always 100% successful. Sometimes I dive off into topics that really don't matter that much to game masters, but matter to other groups or very select sets. But for me, I want to help game masters. I have a structure to this show. And the structure generally follows this format, which you're seeing a little bit of today. Today's show is a little bit different, so doesn't quite follow the format perfectly. But generally, the structure of the show is I do some Sly Flourish news. What's new with the other work that I do? I talk about articles that are coming out. I talk about stuff coming out on Patreon. I talk about books that I'm working on. I talk about other things. And that's because one of the things I think that I can help you with is by showing you the other work that I do to help you run great games, because this show is only one part of all of the work that my wife and I, who run Sly Flourish together, that we do to help GMs run great games. So that's one of the reasons why I focus on what I am up to, what we are up to in the Sly Flourish world. Then I cover RPG hobby news that I think matters to game masters. One of the focuses here is I don't talk about general industry news. You didn't hear me, for example, I did mention the Hasbro quarterly earnings report where they talked about D&D stuff, but only in passing. I don't really have like a show segment where I dive in on all of the numbers of what's going on in the hobby, because that's more of like an industry news thing. And I don't really cover specifically industry news. I cover the news that matters to game masters who are running games. So that's something that I try to focus on when I'm looking at the kind of stuff that I cover. I want to cover stuff that matters to game masters, and in the hobby news that matters to game masters. Then there are product and crowdfunding spotlights. And I'm going to talk about what a spotlight is, because we're about to do one today. And so and I thought this is a good time to kind of talk about the difference between doing a spotlight and doing a review, because there is a big difference in how I approach them. And I kind of want to make sure there's a big difference for you as well. But I do want to bring into the light, I want to kind of shine a spotlight on products or crowdfunding campaigns or sales and good deals that are going on that I think are worth you taking a look at. I do not necessarily say, I recommend you buy it. There are occasions where I will say, you should absolutely get in on this. This is a fantastic deal. And I have to be I have to be sure of that if I'm going to recommend that. A lot of times, my spotlights are to just shine a light on it so you can take a look at it and decide if it works for you, because all of us are different. So it's rare when I offer like an unequivocal recommendation. It's more likely I'm saying, take a look at this. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then I do commentary on the hobby. Again, trying to focus on GM stuff. This kind of gets into the RPG hobby news segment. But what I'm doing right now is what I would consider to be a commentary on the hobby. I'm talking about this show. This is actually more like the Sly Flourish news. Wait, what's the show about? But I might have like a larger commentary on what's going on in the RPG hobby. Again, trying to take it from the standpoint of what matters for game masters. Then I usually offer a GM tip. Okay, hey, here's something that we can take to our games and use. Here's an experience that I had in my own game that I'd like to share. The example of, hey, I ran my Ravenloft game, and here is something that worked well in my Ravenloft game of turning the charm instead into a quick dominate so that you can have the feeling of a character getting charmed and attacking an ally without taking their agency away from their character. That's an example of like a GM tip. And then I have the Patreon Q&A, where patrons of Sly Flourish ask questions on the Patreon. I answer them all there, and then some of them I bring here because I think these are good questions that all GMs or many GMs could benefit from. So I try to dive into those. So that's the structure of the show. But I have some other thoughts about it that I wanted to share as well. So on the idea of spotlights, not reviews. Reviewing a product to me, an RPG product, is really hard. And most of the reason why is that I can't really review a product until I've used it extensively. So I don't even know that I have a full product review of the D&D 2024 books. I did a commentary where I talked about comparing all of the various books of all of the various 5e systems and which ones I recommended, right? Which ones I would say fit into a different category. And that is based on having run lots of games with all of those books. So that's part of it. But like one of the things, and I haven't really done like big adventure deep dives in a while, and some of the reason why is that it takes a long time to run an adventure, and just reading it isn't enough for me. There are other people in this industry. My friends Sean Merwin and Teos Abadia over on Mastering Dungeons, they do really good deep dives of like new systems. Lately, they've been going through Draw Steel, but they also went through Daggerheart, and they spent multiple episodes diving into individual pieces of those games. That is a level of depth I don't do on this show. And if you want that level of depth, which I highly recommend, you should check out their show because they do it as well. I don't really feel like I can do a good, thorough review of a product until I've run it. But instead, I do spotlights. And to me, the core difference is a spotlight is me shining a light on the product and then telling you, you may want to take a look at it more and decide if it's for you. The other things you might look at, for example, are reading other reviews of it, talking to other people about it, asking questions in various online forums, because these products can get expensive. The one I'm going to review today, the products I'm going to review today cost $110 for the 2 books. That's pretty costly. And that's just for the physical version. If you add digital into there, it could be $130, $170, right? That's a lot of money. So it's worth your time, not just to listen to me talk about something, but to dive into it even further to make sure that it's going to get the value to you that you want. When I do crowdfunding spotlights, for example, one of the things I try to highlight is like, do they have a clickable, downloadable sample of the product that they're doing? And the reason why that's important to me is it shows me that this campaign, that the people producing this are far enough along to be able to show what this product is actually going to look like, even if they haven't filled it all out. And it's a good way for you to be able to get your hands on the product itself, look at the PDF of the product itself, and decide if this one is really worth your time and energy and money. Again, it's very rare for me to highlight a crowdfunding campaign other than my own where I say, you should absolutely back this, right? Instead, what I do is say, this exists. This is a spotlight that exists. And you may want to take a look at it and see if it's for you. That to me is the real difference between a spotlight and a review. Again, I serve game masters, right? My service is to game masters. It's not to other companies. It's not to other creators. It's not to other products. It's not to the industry overall. I serve game masters. So that matters to me when it comes to things like, how much money does this cost? What does it take to integrate it in your game, right? And there are times where I either don't cover a product or I'm harsh on a product from the standpoint of, how is this going to matter to game masters, right? Again, I'm not always perfect at this. I'm in the industry. I create stuff in the industry. This gets another piece about my own bias. But, I'm not always perfect at this, but this is really what I try to serve. Does this product serve game masters? Does this thing I'm talking about serve game masters? I don't cover full industry news. I talked about this. There's lots of stuff going on in the tabletop RPG industry, streaming shows and business reports and other kinds of product lines that are going on out there. I don't focus on those because those are not RPG things that you bring to your table and run. That's really the stuff that I try to focus on. Again, there are other people that talk about it, and I think that that's really good. I also don't focus on breaking news. Like today, yes, I'm doing a review of the Forgotten Realms books, but if you notice, I guess I did. I was going to say, I didn't really talk about them much, but I talked about them from time to time. But I don't, an example of breaking news that I'm not talking about today is the new Unearthed Arcana that Wizards of the Coast put out for a bunch of new subclasses. That to me is kind of an industry news thing, and I'm far more interested in seeing what kind of products Wizards is putting out, and then I want to wait till the product is out before I really focus on it. So to me, that's something that I try to do is, I'm not about breaking news. I'm not about trying to one up everybody else. There are a huge bunch of YouTube channels where there was another YouTube creator who posted about this, where he said, I have to be on call 24/7 because Critical Role might do something big. And if they do something big, I have to get a video up within 2 hours. Yeah, that ain't me, right? First of all, this show's on a schedule. I only do it once a week and I do it on Sundays, and I very rarely have it done at other times. And almost never because there's there's big news that I have to talk about right now. So I do not focus on breaking news. I am not a reporter, right? If I do not have the hardened ethics of independent reporting. I serve game masters first and foremost, but I'm also a freelancer in this industry. I have been paid by many RPG companies. I have gotten many free samples or review copies of things, and I have my own personal biases in this whole industry as well. So I am very much a biased member. I try to make that clear where my biases are. But I'm definitely have my own kind of personal opinions on stuff like that. But my prime goal is to help game masters. One thing and this is important, a lot of creators reach out to me regularly. I get multiple a day at this point of creators who have something. They know how hard it is to get attention applied to a product. They know the trick, and I know this too. As a producer of RPG products, I know how hard it is to get attention to different products. So I get a lot of review samples. I get a lot of people, press releases, things, and people reaching out to me saying, hey, I've got a really cool thing I'd love for you to talk about on the show. One is I don't review anything that doesn't grab me as something that's really going to help GMs, right? And in many cases, it's like if it's been done before, then I'm not likely to review it. But also, I have way more stuff that reaches me than I could ever review. So that is not an opinion on the product. Me not talking about something does not mean you should not take a lack of evidence as evidence. So if I haven't covered your game of choice or your product of choice or the product that you've created, it isn't because I don't like it. Right? It's not because I think it's bad. It's because I have way more stuff than I can ever talk about. And so I have to decide where I'm going to focus my time and my attention on trying to focus on the stuff that I think is going to most help GMs. Again, I am not perfect in any of this. I always have more stuff than I cover. And all of this stuff, we each have our own opinions. So again, it's not a matter of me making a judgment call saying this is good or bad. It is me trying to say, hey, this is something you might want to take a look at. So if I don't show something, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that I think it is bad. And it doesn't mean it won't be right for you. You could love it too. So those are really the thoughts that I wanted to have about the talk show. I wanted to kind of define that to make it kind of clear what my perspective is, who I serve, which is game masters, and really what I try to adhere to as my own ideal, recognizing things like I am a member of this own industry, I'm a producer of RPG products, I have freelanced for many other RPG products, and yet I still want to talk about all of the things that I want to talk about. So I wanted to kind of make that clear, and hopefully that helps you get an idea of the perspective that I'm taking when it comes to talking about RPG stuff on this show. So I hope that was useful to you to get a good idea of what this show is all about and to help me kind of focus down on making sure that I continue to serve those to whom I have the charge of serving, which are game masters, in all the work that we do. So this past week, Wizards of the Coast in local game shops, an early release in local game shops, and on pre-order, and for those who had pre-ordered, now the new two Forgotten Realms books have been released. This is the first official Forgotten Realms source books that have been released since, I believe, the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, even though there's been lots of Forgotten Realms content that came out. I went down to my local game shop and I bought the 2 special edition covers of these 2 books, which are Forgotten Realms Heroes of Faerun and Forgotten Realms Adventures in Faerun. And today I am going to do a spotlight. We're going to talk about them, give you some of my initial impressions, and I will offer to you some thoughts on whether or not you should pick up these books, which I'm going to dive into. I am going to be looking here on the screen today. I'm going to be looking at the D&D Beyond versions of these books, which I do get as part of I have an insider account with D&D Beyond for work that I had done for D&D Beyond long ago that gives me access to the books so that I can streamline them, or so I can stream them and I can show off parts of them here. But I did not receive a review copy of these books. I went and bought my own copies myself. So there's your disclaimer of what we've got. So first things first, should you buy them? I think I have a pretty good model on whether or not you should buy them. So first of all, I'm going to give that the 10-second summary. I think they're really good. I really, really like them. As a Forgotten Realms fan, as somebody whose first D&D campaign was set in the Forgotten Realms back in the 2nd edition times, back in the late 80s, I really like these books. I like the Forgotten Realms as a setting that I really enjoy, and I think these books do a fantastic job of representing the realms. I also think that they're very expensive, and I'm going to talk more about the high cost of these books compared to some of the books that we've had in the past and things like that. That's my opinion of it, but your opinion matters too, and more than mine to you, and the question comes up of whether or not you should buy them. And I think there's some good key questions you can ask yourself that can help you define whether or not you should buy them. The first question is, are you a fan of the Forgotten Realms and its lore? If the answer to that question is no, you should not buy these books. If the answer to the question is yes, I like Forgotten Realms lore, and I'm a fan of the Forgotten Realms, and I like Forgotten Realms lore, then these are excellent books. Like that is at least one mark that, yes, you should probably buy them. But almost certainly you should not buy them. If you're not a fan of the realms, I don't know why you would buy these books, especially given that their cost is pretty high. Another question is, would you run a campaign in the Forgotten Realms soon and in one of the 5 regions that are focused in the Adventures of Faerun book? Those regions being Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, the Dalelands, Kalimshan, and the Moonshae Isles. If you like the Forgotten Realms, you would run campaigns there, and you would be willing to run in one of those 5 settings. That, I think, makes these a really good value. If you're not planning to run a campaign in them, and you don't like those regions, I don't know that you're getting a lot of value out of these books. Do you really want the in-store special edition covers? If the answer to that is yes, then you're going to want to go and buy them. I think the covers look really, really cool. They're really neat covers. And this is one of my biases. I'm a total sucker for the special edition covers. So I've been paying a lot of attention to my local game shop when they got them in there. My wife and I ran over to the store after work to go pick up the special, because they didn't get a lot of them. I think they got like 3 copies of each or something like that, 4 copies of each. So I ran in and got my copy because I wanted the special edition covers. If you don't care about special edition covers, and honestly, I like them, but you're a lot better off if you don't, because if you don't, you can always pick up these books whenever you want to pick them up, right? And you can pick them up from a lot of different other outlets than just going to your local game shop to get them. So if you don't like special edition covers, then that is definitely a consideration as too. Do you want these as permanent artifacts in your RPG library? Do they feel like the kind of book that you would want to pick up 20 years from now? I have other Forgotten Realms books in my library that I still will go over. I have the 3rd edition campaign source book, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. I think if you like having these books as artifacts on your list, it is worth picking them up, because these are, I think, very good artifacts. And I will tell you this, I feel like the amount of lore that's covered in these 2 books is so significant that even if you weren't playing 5th edition, a version of the Forgotten Realms, you can get a lot of value from these books. So I think that matters. Do you and your players use D&D Beyond? If so, I would recommend you have your players pool together some money to buy the Heroes of Faerun guide on D&D Beyond, so they get access to those character features that are available in that book when you have a shared campaign. Only one player needs to get them, but that way you have access to them. I don't think it should always be a burden on the DM to buy all this new stuff. As far as the GM is concerned, if you want to have digital versions of all of the maps, and there are a ton of maps that are available in Adventures in Faerun, it might be worth picking up the D&D Beyond version of Adventures in Faerun just to get access to all those maps. And then what I would do is make sure that you go through that book and you download copies of all those maps so that you have your own archive of those maps that you can then use in your virtual tabletop of choice. Obviously, if you use the maps tool inside D&D Beyond, then they have those already wired in. But one thing you can do if you're spending the money in order to get the Adventures of Faerun book on D&D Beyond, I would make sure to have a downloaded copy of all of those maps so that you can use them in virtual tabletops in the future. Now, cost is a big factor. So if these 2 books together are $110. Right? When you add the D&D Beyond versions in them, the price keeps going up. So if you're buying them all together, and now D&D Beyond has some special deals where you can get a significant amount of money off if you're buying the physical versions and digital versions together. They lower the overall rate. But individually, if you're to buy them, it's $110 for the physical versions, and it's $40 plus $30, $70 for the digital versions if you're not buying them bundled together. That's a lot of money. Right? That's pretty expensive. And that's probably my big sort of negative view of all of this, is that the cost is really high. The material is excellent, right? So I'm going to talk about the material a lot, but I don't think we want to discount how much money all of this costs. If that's a lot of money for you, if you're like, I like the Forgotten Realms a lot, I really want to dive more into Forgotten Realms lore, but that price is prohibitive. I can't get into that. I have a solution for you. Instead, you can pick up the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting, which many people consider the gold standard single volume book that covers the most material from the Forgotten Realms in a single volume. And you can get the PDF of that on DriveThruRPG for $16. That is a really outstanding deal. So if you're looking for an alternative way to get into a lot of Forgotten Realms lore, you can go back. This is, I think it's about 24 years old now. So it's an older version of the Realms. And it's set in about 110 years previously in the timeline. But it covers a lot of material. And for $16, it is an outstanding deal. In fact, it has more material in this book by word count than these 2 books have together. So you actually get more stuff overall. There's good arguments about the artwork is not nearly as good as the new books. The layout isn't nearly as nice. The focus on adventuring is not nearly as high. So the kind of material that you're getting from that version of the book and now this version of the Forgotten Realms is very different. So you can't really compare it that way. But still, it isn't. If you want to dive into Realms lore and you want to do so without paying, 3 figures. So you can pick up the Forgotten Realms campaign setting guide for $16 on Drive-Thru-RPG. And that is a really outstanding deal for a ton of Forgotten Realms lore if you're finding the price of the new books to be prohibitive. So that is those are my top level observations, but I wanted to offer some other things that I got when I have flipped through these books. I read through both the physical versions of the books. I had poked around through the D&D Beyond versions as well, and I wanted to offer a couple of things. One is I was very surprised that the Heroes of Faerun book, we'll bring up the table of contents here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Boop. So this is the contents that's available on D&D Beyond. The Heroes of Faerun book, this is the quote-unquote, and it says it right on it, player expansion is at the top of the book, right? It's not really a player expansion. It really has a ton of GM stuff in here and a ton of stuff that as a GM I would totally want. So the actual character options section, and I have a breakout of the number of physical pages, so if you want an idea of like how big these sections are, the Heroes book has 32 pages of character options, 48 pages of the Guide to the Realms, 33 pages on Gods of the Realms, 7 pages on the Whole Realms catalog, 11 pages of magic, 39 pages of factions. By my loose count, it's about 120 pages of lore. That is a lot of lore and not a lot of character stuff that are inside this book. So if you're looking for like a grid thick book filled with like character crunchy mechanics, this is not it. For me, that's actually better. I don't want a giant book full of character mechanics. I want a book that's got lots of lore in it. What that means is really, instead of being a player-focused guide and a GM-focused guide, these are really one book. And that's why I talk about the price being high, that I really consider this to be one volume. And it's one volume that is useful for game masters overall, even though it's got some character stuff in it, which is why my recommendation is, I had mentioned having your players buy the hero version on D&D Beyond. As a GM, I think you should buy the physical version of that book so that you have the lore in hand in a volume that you own, that you can put on your shelf and have there for 20 years, and nobody is going to come and take it away from you. Probably. I don't think so. Well, you never know these days, but it doesn't feel like anybody's going to come and take your books away. It's certainly not nearly as likely as losing access on the internet. But they're really one volume, which is something that I thought was curious to me. It's something I didn't expect. And for me, because I was buying them anyway, it was a nice bonus because it meant like, wow, there is a lot of lore in these books. That was really the thing I was focused on, is a lot of lore. And what's interesting is the Heroes book covers all of the realms. So it's not, and you can take a look here, right? The Guide to the Realms, in the Guide to the Realms section, it shows Honoruk, the Arcane Empires, Forgotten Lands, Heartlands, Lands of Intrigue, the North, Old Empires, Sword Coast, Trackless Sea, Vilhoon Reach, and beyond. It covers the whole realms in that section of the book. That 50-page section of the book covers everything. It's not just focused on specific regions. The Adventurer's book is focused on specific regions, which means if you want something that's covering both the whole realms and focusing on specific regions, you really need both books. That was a big observation. Another one is that a big focus of these books, and the big focus of the Adventures in Faerun, which I think gave it the title Adventures in Faerun, is it has a ton of these small focused adventures that run basically half a page to 1 page deep. They released one of those for free on D&D Beyond. They released this one for free on D&D Beyond. People were able to go subscribe to it and pick it up on D&D Beyond. And it's an example where they have it. And I am on the fence on these, but I'm leaning towards really liking the format for this, right? This is, if you're familiar with the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, you're familiar with the idea that they had, I think it was like 5 or 6 of these short half-page adventures that were kind of showing you the type of notes you might write down for your own adventures, which I thought was a good approach. It at least showed people, I'm not sure if it exactly had the right stuff in them, and I feel the same way about these, but I think showing people that you don't need a lot to run an adventure is a really powerful lesson that Wizards of the Coast and myself can reinforce to game masters to say, hey, GM, you don't need to have nearly as much as you think you do in order to run a fun adventure for your group. And they reinforce that a lot in here. I also think that these are pretty good at highlighting Forgotten Realmsy stuff so that you have these sort of adventure scenarios that you could fill out with your own material that still focus on adventure stuff. But you can see like the word count for these is like 500 words, right? They're really short and they focus on specific things. Now, one nice thing is most of them include a map. So almost always, not almost always, but maybe like half the time, they include a specific map for it that shows you what's going on in that particular adventure. So I really like these adventure scenarios. They're not all perfect. Like I read some of them and I was like, yeah, that one's not for me. And then other ones I read and said, yeah, I could totally run an adventure with this. So I might in a future show dive in a little deeper into this adventure format because I think it's actually a pretty powerful thing. One of the other features of these short adventures that I really like is about the ones that don't have a map often refer to the maps that are inside the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, somebody could say like, oh, you're just cheaping out. You don't want to write a special Wizard Tower map. So instead, you just reference the Wizard Tower map that's inside the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think that's actually a subtle lesson that these books are teaching game masters, which is you can reuse your maps. You can have a handful of maps on hand, like those in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I think are excellent maps. So the maps in the Dungeon Master's Guide are done by Dyson Logos, who is one of my favorite cartographers and one of the most generous cartographers in this industry. And he has a bunch of maps in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I think when you have a adventure in a book like this that says you can use the map from here for your Dungeon Master's Guide, A, that's giving you more value out of the book that you already own, and B, it's reminding you as a game master that you can, it's messy. Coming up with adventures is messy, and you don't always have to have perfectly segmented maps with perfect 5-foot gridded squares that all align with key graphics on, key markings on everything. It's okay to play fast and loose with this stuff because fast and loose gives you room for your own worlds, for your own inspiration and everything else. So so that's one of the reasons I like these short adventures. Even if in the specifics, like when I read Tenebrous Stone, I was like, I don't know if I like this one. There were things missing from here. I think one of my reviews was, it's too big in some ways and too small in others, right? Like, and it almost sounds like, the food is terrible and also in such small portions. But I'm still going back and forth on these, right? And in many cases when I was reading the books, I liked what I saw. I really liked those short adventures. And that's good because there's like 50 of them in here. I had complained before these books came out. I made these jokes a couple of times. I think I made the jokes of like, hey, if there's a new Dark Sun book, how are they going to manage to squeeze Baldur's Gate into a new upcoming Dark Sun book? And my joke was like, of the Adventures in Faerun book, there are 5 regions that they focus on. And 2 of those regions are far from forgotten, right? There is nothing forgotten about Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale. And I was upset. I think upset is fair. I was grumpy that I felt like I'm going to be paying $60. This is a $60 book. I was going to pay $60 for a book that covered 2 regions that I've already played to death. And that's still true because I was a good WotC soldier and I was told you were going to go buy Rime of the Frostmaiden and run it for 2 of your groups, which I did, even though I really didn't like it. And I also was a good soldier back 10 years ago when they put out Legacy of the Crystal Shard, and I ran that adventure, which means in the past 10 years, I've already run 3 Icewind Dale campaigns. There are other places like to go. Baldur's Gate. I was a good soldier. I picked up Descent into Baldur's Gate, or Descent into Avernus. I'm sorry, Baldur's Gate to Descent into Avernus. Did my duty, ran that adventure. Also really didn't like that adventure, but I've already run Baldur's Gate. And I was a good soldier before, and I ran Heroes of Baldur's Gate, and I ran that for a group, which means I've run Baldur's Gate twice in the past 10 years. So that means Icewind Dale 3 times, Baldur's Gate twice, and now I get a new book that's got Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale in it. The arguments are, that's great for you, Mike Shea, but many of the people that are into this hobby weren't even playing RPGs when those books came out. That's fair. I get it. Not everything has to be made for me. And it doesn't matter now because the books are out and I have what I have. But boy, I would have loved them to replace one of those with Thay, right? I would really love a region of Thay. Thay was in the freaking movie, right? You want to say like nobody knows what Thay is. There's no attention on Thay. Thay was part of the movie. So was Neverwinter, and Neverwinter wasn't covered. Now, granted, there's a good 4th edition Neverwinter book that isn't too old. So you want Neverwinter, you can get a whole Neverwinter book. I really felt like they could have focused on some new regions that they haven't already covered in the 5th edition lifespan. That said, when I read the new Icewind Dale section, they have progressed it since the events in Rime of the Frostmaiden and come up with new interesting plots and new interesting villains. That means if you did like Icewind Dale and you wanted to go back there, I don't, but if you did, you could run an entirely new campaign there with a lot of good material in there, with interesting villains, interesting encounters, and interesting stuff. So I take back a little bit. I'm still grumpy, but I take back a little of my criticism of it. Baldur's Gate, I get why you put Baldur's Gate in there. I know Baldur's Gate Game of the Year 3 years ago and everything like that. I just feel like we've got, you better not try to sell me another Baldur's Gate product at this point. Like, I've had enough. Do some new stuff. Do some new stuff. And when I say new stuff, I mean old stuff. Right? Go back. Thay, there has not been a Thay source book since 2nd edition D&D. There's been no Thay, right? Thay would be a great, and it's such a fantastic, grim, cool, different than the rest of the realms kind of place to run adventures. I think it was a really missed opportunity, but it's okay. And if you want Baldur's Gate and you want Icewind Dale, then you're set. I really dig the Dale End section. And for me, one of the things that excites me about this book is that I would totally run a D&D 2024 campaign set in the Dalelands, like starting at level 1. I think it was where I ran my first. I guess my first game was in Cormier, but we went to the Dalelands in my first campaign back in the late 1980s. And I really like it. The Dalelands has always been kind of near and dear to my heart. And they do, it's a big chunky section of the Dalelands. In fact, the Dalelands is the largest section of that book. It's 45 pages of the adventure book, focuses on the Dalelands, the adventures you could run there and everything else. And knowing that they have that there and that that's a location I'd be very interested in running makes me feel like I could get a lot of value out of it. And really, I feel like if you're going to run a campaign in any one of these 5 regions, it's probably worth the money when you consider the amount of time that you and your players are going to spend in there. I think it's really cool. Scipio, friend of the show, asks how much of Myth Draenor. It's got a big chunk of Myth Draenor stuff in here. There's a whole and beautiful one thing about this book. Wow, are there a lot of maps, both regional maps that are inside the Hero's Guide and a bunch of dungeon maps and overland maps for locations in the Adventurer's Guide. So there's a ton of art and there's a ton of maps. So when I talk about the high cost, you can tell where the money went. Right? There's a lot of high value stuff in this. It is really, really nice. So I would definitely, I don't want to take too much on the whole, like it costs too much. I don't want to say it costs too much. I'm just saying it's expensive. You know where that money went. So lots of really cool stuff inside this. And when I look at the section of the Dalelands, I would totally run a campaign here. And I think it's worthwhile to have these books. Like, I would be excited and I would feel like this is a good solid collection to have the 3 core books and these 2 books and then run a fun Dalelands campaign. I think you've got a lot going on. So I really dug that. I mentioned before that the 2 books reference each other pretty often, and really they're one book. They really cover a lot. Another interesting thing is there is a lot of use of renown and bastions. The Heroes book, for example, has a huge section on factions of the realms. It's a 40-page section. What's interesting is even though there are factions like the Red Wizards of Thay and the Purple Dragon Knights and the Cult of the Dragon, they are still factions that you could be connected to as a player. I kind of feel like when they were developing these books, something that, this is one where I was looking at it, I'm like, was this really developed as 2 separate books, or did they develop one book and then went back and then turned it into 2 separate books? And I kind of feel like it's the latter, because it feels like some of these factions, I don't know why you would want your character to be connected to some of the factions that they have. And in fact, I would love more material about how these factions can be villains. We already know they're kind of villains, and they are, like that you can have, did I say Purple Dragon Knights now? Red Wizards of Thay, Cult of the Dragon, and the Zinterim are clearly like darker factions, and in some cases outright evil. But one of the things they do with these factions is they include, again, really cool art, but they also include renown. So renown is the option rule that's in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, which I haven't really dug into too much. But and the idea that once you commit quests and things like that, your renown goes up. And when you hit certain levels with renown, certain things, you gain access to certain things. But they also include special facilities that you can get, which are tied to your bastions. So, and it's not just tied to factions. You can also get them as rewards for the adventures that you're doing inside the Adventurer's Guide. So Wizards is clearly, whether you like these things or not, if you like renown and you like bastions, whether you like them or not, what you can't say is that they're not continuing to support these new ideas that have come out in D&D 2024. They are. And I think even if you were playing kind of a looser version of Bastions and you just want the idea for a home base without necessarily all the crunchy mechanics for the home base, you can still use this material to kind of help you build out a home base in the region. So I think that that's pretty neat. And I like that a lot. this has been my general spotlight, and obviously this is a GM's perspective of it. I have not dived into any of the character mechanics, really. I haven't looked at the subclasses. I haven't looked at the new magic. I know there's a big feature on circle magic. Unfortunately, you're probably going to have to find somebody else to talk about it because I haven't really dug into the crunchy bits. For me, I was mostly interested in the lore that these books have because for me as a game master, that's the stuff I feel like I'm going to get a lot of long-term value out of. And the answer to that is there is a ton of that kind of lore in these two books. So I know they were expensive, but I'm very glad I bought them because I think these are going to be excellent additions to my RPG collection. And I am looking forward to running a Dale Linns-based game using D&D 2024 rules. I think that will be really fun. Every quarter over on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, a patron can ask an RPG-related question there, and every week on Friday, I go through and answer all of the questions that have been posted there. Some of those questions I bring here to the show so that we can dive into them a little bit deeper and offer some more insights to the other GMs that are out there. Manma asks, I really enjoy your article on lazy map annotation. One question I had, if I have a loose list of evocative room ideas not tied to the map, how do you recommend coming up with the 3 interesting things in each room, like interactable objects, environmental dressings, clues, or even NPCs? Do you improvise those details on the fly as the players enter the room, or do you tend to pre-write a few bullets for each idea in advance? The tip of the speed of creation is the speed of improv. Victor N asked a very similar question, which I'm going to read out as well and cover both of these. Victor N says, your article on lazy map annotation got me wondering about how you fill in room details based on your short descriptions. Are you improvising all of that in the session? For example, if you have a chamber listed as pain amplifier, do you have an idea of what that looks like, how it works, and how the PCs might interact with it? So both of those questions kind of cover the same topic, which is what I wanted to talk about, which is this idea of lazy improvising details of locations when you're using sort of a lazy map annotation style. I now do this pretty regularly. This is most of the time when I'm running my games. Instead of carefully defining all of the things in every room of these large dungeons, because sometimes they have 20 or 30 rooms, I instead write down a list of the likely chambers that might show up as they explore it, and then I improvise the building of that dungeon on the fly. On the question of the 3 interesting things, the answer is yes, I improvise those most of the time. Only if I know that there are certain main rooms, like boss chambers or the chamber where I know the game is going to start. If there are certain main chambers that I know, I think it's highly likely the characters are going to go there, those I will define by adding a couple of extra features. But a lot of time I don't add the extra features unless it's those circumstances. Most of the time I just write down a single evocative name, like pain amplifier. And here's the interesting thing. You brought up pain amplifier because you're like, what the hell is that? Right? Mike wrote pain amplifier down in his notes. But what is that? The answer is, I don't know, because they never went there. Right? So I didn't waste any brain power coming up with a bunch of details about the pain amplifier because it turns out the characters never went to the pain amplifier. So in my head, I don't really have anything. Now, if I was to improvise what a pain amplifier is, and this was kind of in an experimental section of a laboratory of shady wizards down beneath the City of Arches, very likely to me a pain amplifier would be something like a highly mechanical Iron Maiden with lots of pipes and tubes and lightning stuff and sort of other things that were connected that would, recognizing, wow, they put people in there and they put pain into them and they amplify that pain and use that for some kind of dark energy. I would probably improvise something like that on the fly if they had gone there. But the answer is they didn't. If you start to think on the math of this, you can see why trying to come up with 3 aspects to every room that you have. If let's say you have 20 rooms and you decide I'm going to have to define all the 20 rooms. Now you have 20 things. And now you're like, now I also need to have 3 aspects for every one of those 20 rooms with those 20 defined names. That's now 80 different little tags you have to put in your notes. Now, maybe you've got nothing but time, but I certainly don't. And trying to put down 80 items like that would burn me out, right? That is way too much stuff. So instead, I don't even come up with the 20, right? I come up with maybe 10 for a 20-room dungeon. And the idea is they're not going to hit every one of those rooms. And if they do, I'll improvise a little bit more. Now, if you need guidance on like where to find details like this, how to kind of get your brain for details like this, there's a couple sources. One is if you're looking for chamber names in the first place, in the Lazy GM reference document, which is on slyflourish.com, it's at the top of slyflourish.com, you can find it. In there, you can find 10 common adventure locations and 20 chambers within those locations. The Game Master's Guide to Tales of the Valiant Giant has a very similar set of tables of like common locations, as does the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. So those 3 guides give you a lot of ideas there to sort of inspire things that are going on there. For more specific details, if you're having trouble with that, you can check out Raging Swan's huge list of products for the Dread Thingonomicon and the Dread Laronomicon. I think are really good books that have lots and lots of further detail that you can dive into. But honestly, this is one of those ideas where the more you kind of get used to improvising this stuff, the better you're going to get at it. And then you need to prep a lot less, because trying to define every single room in a dungeon and then adding 3 aspects to it is really going to burn you out. So I don't recommend it. Slim Chance says, as a player in-game, how can I reach out to another player through our characters to involve them more in the story being created? E.g., can my character ask their character to assist with something or ask them about their background? The answer is, of course, yes. And those sort of inside character-to-character interactions are fantastic. The one thing I would do, though, is you do not want the player to get caught flat-footed, the other player to get caught flat-footed. So what I would do is, out of the game, you might reach out to the player and say, hey, I thought it would be fun if your character and my character had this connection. How do you feel about that? And then talk about it a little bit offline, out of character, maybe even in email or as messages on Discord or texting or whatever, but have the conversation with the player first before you try to have like an in-game character-to-character connection that you're sort of surprising them with. Sometimes the surprise between 2 characters doesn't always go well. And it's a little nicer when the 2 players are aware that, hey, we're going to have this thing, and then the 2 characters can kind of play off of each other, but the players are already on board. And particularly like what's in game and what's out of game. Like what's on board, what are we on board with and what are we not on board with? It's a kind of thing that you want to do. This can also help with NPCs and characters. If you're a GM that's like, I want to have a strong connection between an NPC and a character, talk to the player about it first and say, hey, I thought it'd be cool if you had this connection. How do you feel about that? Right? I think that would be interesting. So I think that there are ways you can go about it. But the one thing that I would do is make sure that you're having that conversation with the player first, ideally offline, with giving them some time to think, so that you're not surprising them with a sudden, hey, we want to have this character connection between the 2 of us. I think it works better if you spend a little bit of time and make sure that the other player is on board, because they might not know how to react to that at all. It's something they didn't even think of, and now on the spot in front of everybody else, you're suddenly trying to force them into an element of role-playing that they might not be prepared for. So that would be my main recommendation there. Laura says, could you please expand on how you're reviewing the character these days during your game prep when you tie the secrets and clues to the PCs? What is your thought process as you do it? Why do you do it? How do you choose what to give each character? And is this an evolution of the game prep step? I love how it ties the characters into the world in the upcoming session, and would love to hear more about what you've been thinking as you've been doing this as part of your prep. So yeah, step 1 of the 8 steps of lazy game prep, which is ponder the characters. Who are the characters that are going to be in my next game, right? Bring in the characters. What do we say in return? If you don't have your copy of Return on hand right in front of you right now, I don't know what you're doing with your life. I have mine right next to me within arm's reach. Of course, I don't even remember my own steps, so I don't know what that says about me. Review the characters. Step 1 from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And you can do a lot of different things with review the characters. I was writing about this recently, and one of the thoughts is like, there's like 6 or 7 different things you could review. Everything from what kind of monsters does that character like to fight? What kind of magic items does the character already have? What kind of magic items might they want? What did they get at the last couple of levels? What connections do they have background-wise to the other characters? Are there any stories or hooks that are going on with it? There's lots of different things that you can connect the characters to. And it's worth considering those things, but probably not all at once, and probably not every time you prep. Instead, you kind of want to decide, is this the game where I should focus more on what kind of monsters they like to fight? Is this the game where I should try to think more about what kind of items they might want? You're right. Those are different questions that you can ask yourself. But yes, one of the things I've done lately, and I've focused on a lot in my own game prep, which I have found useful for me, is the creation of character-driven secrets. This idea that there are elements to the current game that the character knows about. One of the things I think is really valuable with all of the 8 steps is to ask the prompting question. What is the question that this element of prep is asking us to answer? The example is, what are the secrets and clues the characters might discover in the next game? What are the monsters they might face? Who are the NPCs they might meet? Those are like prompting questions. What treasure might they discover, right? And the prompting question for the characters are, what could the characters know about what's going on in the next session? Right? What might they know about in the next session? And a lot of times, and I literally just did this an hour ago for my Dragon Empire game. So let's take a look. Right? And I have my characters from my Dragonbane game. I have Amavin, knows that these deserts are a great place to keep the Morrus' secrets. Right? So they're in the desert right now. The whole up thing is that they are deep in the desert going into a corrupt laboratory of blood mages. Right? And so the secrets are things that can that the character might know about or might tie the character in to what's going on here. Cal recognizes the hideous, twisted nature of the blood magic and what it did to the Red Road. The Red Road is a ley line and a shadow road. Mateo recognizes that the rituals of the blood mages require both magic and engineering to work. There is an infernal machine here. That's because Mateo is a mechanist. Rowan recognizes the value the Red Hand would have for the Dragon Empire. Rowan is a former warrior that has fought with the Dragon Empire in the past, and he knows, like, having conscripted blood raging warriors is a super powerful army. He might understand that better than the other characters do. Tolstoy, the children of Mott would be very powerful allies to battle Adasha, who's a dragon ruler, and his followers here in the east. That's because Tolstoy is connected to the children of Mott. He knows he's connected to Mott. Emmert, the children of Mott aren't inherently evil, even though they worship a dark deity. They have strong principles for their life in the desert under the claws of the Dragon Empire. So these are all bits of history and lore and connections to the current game that are tied specifically to the characters. And those sort of questions help me sort of keep the characters in mind and also make sure that the sort of lore that I'm revealing goes into those characters. And the way that manifests at the table is a lot of times I will say things like, Emmert, you know that even though the children of Mott are worshiping a dark deity, they are not evil inherent themselves. They are people who have struggled under life in the inhospitable desert and now are struggling under the brutal dictatorship of the Dragon Empire too. And they seek out Mott and Mott's power as a way to help them fight that, even though they themselves have a strong code of honor and loyalty to themselves, and they don't just sacrifice people. They actually are using this power to fight. Right? That is a way to manifest that kind of information at the table that they could learn. Now, some ask, well, do you bury that behind a skill check? Usually not. Usually the fact that the player and the character has this background, they already know this stuff. And during the game, I can sort of bring it up and say, like, Rowan, when you look at the Red Hand, these soldiers that are being created by the Blood Mages of Kinesh, you see ideal soldiers. Right? Like, they don't worry about food. They'll eat anything. In fact, they eat each other. And they certainly eat their victims. They are fanatically loyal to the dragons, but also fanatic in their bloodlust as well. They are probably the most dangerous and brutal soldiers that you've seen. And the reason you've seen that is because you've been hanging out with a lot of the soldiers of the Dragon Empire. So that's really where my thought process goes. I didn't get into things like the other questions that you might ask about, like, what interesting stuff did they pick up at their last level that they might want to highlight? There's a lot of elements that you can dive into when you're reviewing the characters. You could spend a lot of time reviewing the characters, but a lot of where I focus my attention now is what information might the character know that ties them into the rest of the lore of the game is probably the most common one that I ask myself these days. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did and you want more stuff like this, the best way to get it is to subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You can find a link down in the show notes. You will get a free Adventure Generator PDF, and you will get a weekly RPG-related article with tips to help run your games, including links to all of the other work that I do all over the net, including the table of contents for this show and things like that. You can also become a patron of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, downloadable digital tools, access to a whole bunch of things to help you run your games. There is a dedicated podcast called Readings and Reflections available on the Patreon. There's a whole set of adventure scenarios for City of Arches available on the Patreon. You get access to our awesome dedicated Discord server where we talk about all things in tabletop RPGs and in lazy game mastering. And you help me put on shows like this. You can also pick up any of my books for yourself or your friends or other fellow GMs as we get into holiday seasons. Consider picking up books for your friends, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Workbook, The Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, City of Arches, and more at the Sly Flourish Bookstore. Links for that are all in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day and get out there and play an RPG.